Welcome back to Roundtail Restoration, everybody. My name is Chris. This here is the steering rack from a 1964 Triumph TR4. It's all nice and pretty, freshly painted, new rubber boots and all that kind of good stuff. I think I even came up with a good trick to get this paint in the rear rubber boot on. So, thanks for watching. Let's get it sorted. Steering rack from the Triumph TR4. If it's not identical to what I have on the Spitfire, it's damn near close enough. So this rack and pinion, and essentially what happens is the steering column comes down here, and you turn the steering wheel, obviously, and you probably can see that the tie rods are moving in and out. Pretty simple, not much to it, but the rubber's shot and the seals are shot and everything, and needs to be cleaned up and painted and everything, just like everything else on the car. So we're going to go ahead, take these clips off here, and then start to get into getting the boots off, get the tie rods ends off, get everything cleaned up, painted. There are some basic inspections that you can do with this thing. It's not real complicated, but there are some checks that you can do. Point out right here, this is a ground strap. This is essentially what completes the circuit to ground for your horn. So if your horn doesn't work, this guy is buried in there, and you've got another one buried in the rubber coupling of the steering column as the shaft comes into the engine bay. So if your horn doesn't work, these are some places to check grounds out. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get these clips off, and there's not a whole lot to this. I've already got the bolts out, obviously. Got rubber in here. So these guys come off. This is essentially what bolts it to the car. These are kind of weird looking. They look like just weird looking. I don't know, just funny looking. And then you got the rubber here. Obviously, I'll be replacing that. I've got some polyurethane, polybush ones already. So that was obviously very easy. We'll go ahead and get this in some purple power, get it degreased in the ultrasonic sink. I'll come back, I'll start getting the tie rods off, and then we'll strip down the rest of the rack here. So the boots are simply held on with pipe clamps. You got some original ones on here. You got one original one, and then regular just Jubilee clips here. Just loosen those up and run those out. Not a whole lot to it there. And all that's doing is securing the boot. The tie rod end is next, and so you've got your tie rod end that obviously goes to the steering arm on the front suspension, and then you got a bolt here, and that bolt keeps this in place so prevent it from spinning. So it's about a 3/4 inch bolt here. You got to loosen that up. There's a little flat spot kind of right here, right behind the knuckle on the tie rod. That's let's see, you can probably use a couple different sizes here with this. 3/4 will work with that too. See how tight this is. All right, so then you loosen that up, and then this will just spin right out, just like that. Now, you can count the number of turns and all that kind of stuff as you're taking this off if you want to make sure it's all realigned, but since I'm not just redoing the tie rod ends here, I'm redoing the whole steering column. I'm not going to worry about counting the number of turns. But if all you were doing is replacing these because the bushes were shot or the rubber was shot, like this rubber's all cracked and nasty, and the inside of it is quite rusty, you wouldn't need to worry about that. But we're going to leave that bolt on there just so I don't lose it. Well, actually, we'll take it off to get the rubber off, and then we'll put it back on so I don't lose it. So there's that, and then this rubber should just slide right off. All right, so this would normally be full of nastiness, and it's full of a little bit of nastiness, but now you can see that I've got the ball of the tie rod here, and then all the stuff that holds that in. So these are all going to have to be loosened. There are locking clips on these, so we'll have to bend those out and loosen them up, and then I can finally get this pipe clamp off. We'll do the other side real quick. That pipe clamp's loose. Loosen this guy. 1/4 inch here. This one looks a little nastier. There we go. Like I said, I got new one of these from TRF. So those will be nice for me. Take this bolt off. That hose clamp. No, that one came right off. So you can see that this end of this rubber is a lot bigger than the end of this rubber. This one's easy to get on. This one's a pain in the rear to get on because this little hole that you can see there has got to clear these big things on the other side. So there's a couple of different tricks to those that I'll show you when we get to that point. So I'm not going to save these rubber pieces. I'm not going to save these pipe clamps. I really like the original looking pipe clamps. What did I do with it? Oh, it's on the other side. I like those, so I do have some of those, and that's what I'll be using. So let me trash this stuff. All right, so as you can see, obviously everything just slides here, and you can see the gear teeth, I think, here. So the gearing's in here. Now that's obviously not going to come apart quite yet. So next up is we're going to go ahead and bend all these clips back, and then we'll go ahead and we will get the tie rods out, get them cleaned up, and inspect those and make sure they're straight. They look it and kind of spinning it and just looking down. Doesn't look bent at all. That one doesn't. Let's see this one. Again, just eyeballing it here. This is obviously not scientific. That one doesn't look bent. A little rusty, but it might be dirt too. So we'll go ahead and get a screwdriver in here. All right, so that looks like all of them. Now, obviously, this is a real big bolt, inch and something. So let's get a appropriate size wrench for it. Well, unfortunately, I don't have a wrench that is 1 1/4 inches. So let's see if we can cheat a little bit. I'll go put this in the vise and see if I can break it away. I was wrong. It is not 1 1/4 inches. It's 1 5/16 inches. But I was able to source one. So that's essentially the tie rod end. And there's some spacers in there, which is part of that critical measurement. So we're going to keep this handed so we can remember that. There's a spring in here. So you want to remember that. And then you've got the bolts themselves, the little lock tab that I showed you that comes off. And then these should run out. Probably have to put this back in the vise. So I'm going over to the vise and clamping it right here on this portion. So let me go ahead. I don't remember if these come off or not, but let me go over there and see if I can get them off. So I got it broken down, but I can't get these bolts off, nuts, whatever they're called something. Workshop manual just says unscrew them, and that's not giving me a warm fuzzy to do that. So I got the ends separated here and got them all quarantined from each other, and it's interesting, the coloration on this one. I don't know if that means it's got like burnt. I wouldn't expect there'd be a whole lot of stuff to burn here. But we'll stick these in the ultrasonic sink too, get them cleaned up. I'm not real concerned about these being handed because the shims and everything will take care of that, but there is some caked on dirt and everything inside the threads, so I'll go and get them on the wire wheel and get them cleaned up. But next up is we're going to go ahead and take care and remove the inside, the internals of this the actual steering box, I guess, gearing that's going to convert the rotation of the steering wheel into the side-to-side motion of the rack. Over at the vise for just ease of use here and the steering rack, so we're going to go ahead and take this plug out. It's 1/2 inch. And this is essentially the grease plug, so you would remove this. Obviously, it's also where the ground cable connects. But you would remove that, a little star washer under there. And you would go, or tooth washer, and then you would go ahead and grease that guy up. We're also going to remove this big cap screw. There is a measurement, a feeler gauge under here. This doesn't get gronked all the way down. This is 1 1/4 inches. Hopefully this comes off pretty easily. No, excuse me, 1 5/16 inches. And you're not going to be playing, are you? I really don't want to gronk down too much on this vise because 1, the body here is aluminum, and 2, I'm pressing on the shaft. Let's try this way. Oh, there we go. All right, so you got a little seal under here, a little washer, and a spring, all sorts of shims. Again, there's a height spec or float spec on this guy. And I don't think there's any balls in here. Doesn't appear so. So we're going to go ahead and put the cap back in there so I don't lose it. We'll go ahead and set this aside. I think there might be one more piece in there. Yep, so this is essentially the piece that clamps down. You can see how it's curved. So this is what, using the tension of that spring and everything, this is what's going to kind of clamp down on the steering rack, and that's what provides tension so the steering wheel just doesn't go flying all over the place. All right, and then in here is, believe it or not, buried in all this muck is an O-ring and a circlip, and we'll go ahead and do that next. As promised, there is a circlip in there, an internal circlip, so let's go ahead and get my circlip pliers here. And there's that. Set that aside. So now that we got that circlip out, we're just going to hopefully pull this thing out. There's a couple things to point out here. One, right here is a little dowel. You don't want to lose that because that essentially locks this rotation in to the body of the steering box there, and you don't, if you lose that, the thing will just rotate freely, and I don't think the steering is going to work very well. So you want to not lose that. And then in this gear, there's a whole bunch of shims in here, and then out comes the gear itself, big old spacer on top here, all that stuff will come apart, and that's pretty much all there is to that. So again, we'll get this all cleaned up, but I don't want to lose control of this, so I'll make sure that I get this all bagged and then probably decrease it individually so I don't lose track of what I got. So that's about as stripped down as you can get this thing without, let's see, I don't think this is anything. You got a little plug right here, but I don't think this is anything except just that. Probably just a plug or a machining hole so they could remount the inside, and then they just plugged it. So with the exception, obviously, of the shaft coming out, which I've got to figure out because I got to get these big bolts off, big nuts, whatever they are. That's pretty much all of it. So we're going to go ahead. This ultrasonic sync is done. Let's see how that is. We'll get this stuff bagged individually, and like I said, we'll just degrease it individually so I don't lose track of anything, and then we'll start looking at trying to get a solution to get these bolts off. I've got obviously the steering box here is hanging from the vise, and I've got the bottom bolt in the vise and clamped pretty good, and then the top bolt here should be loose, and I'm hoping to get this 1 5/16 on there and give me some oomph, and hopefully this way I'll get some leverage. Yep, got that. But it looks like I'm turning the whole shaft instead of the bottom bolt, and that's causing that to cinch up. So that's definitely what's happening. So that bottom bolt is what's loose, and it's not loose from this one. How am I going to do that? All right, well, let me go do the other one, and then I'll see if I can figure something out here. Not real crazy about this, but I can't get this thing broken away, and I got soft jaws in here, and I don't want to jack up this gear, obviously, and chip it or something like that. So I got an impact wrench. I'm hoping that the impact wrench is going to grab it just enough and put the force on the nut and not on the rack itself, and help me break it away. Oh, well, yeah, nothing to that. So there's that guy. And then this lock nut should spin right off. Oops, a little too aggressive there, Fisher. All right, there's that. Good deal. And we'll spin this puppy around, and hopefully the other side will be just as easy. Yep. That it is. And the lock nut. All right, good deal. We'll get this over to the bench, and we'll be able to get that rack right out. So over to the bench, this steering rack should just pretty much pull right out. Yep, that sure did. There you go. That's all there is to it. So this is all greasy and nasty. We'll get this all cleaned up. And I do believe that's as broken down as you can get this stuff. So this is all aluminum like I had mentioned. So we're going to be careful cleaning that I don't use the purple power on that, because the purple power will eat it up. And then everything else is just going to be blasted. I will blast the aluminum too, because it'll be fine. And then paint it. Unfortunately, it's starting to get a little cold. It's the middle of October, so I have a feeling my painting window is closed, which is unfortunate, but I don't really need the steering rack now anyway. So we'll do the best we can and move on. So I'm going to continue to do some stuff in the ultrasonic sink, continue to get stuff cleaned up, but that's essentially how you disassemble this bad puppy. Most people are worried about bugs and stuff getting in their paint jobs. Well, I've got a whole slug. Some of the dangers of painting outside. So we have the steering rack here, and we're going to start to reassemble it. There's, as you would expect, some critical measurements that you got to do here. Mainly just so there's not a lot of slop in the steering rack, and then it kind of holds on to where you position the steering wheel, and then it doesn't just kind of go flying all over the place. So I've got the steering rack all cleaned up and nice and pretty. Ended up painting the aluminum part here silver. The aluminum was kind of getting just not torn up really, but it was easy to get marked up and everything like that, just bare aluminum. So I put paint on it. It's a little more silver than I kind of wanted it, but I'm going with it. Now inside here, which is very tough to see if I can set you up here. Inside, if you can see that, if I can get it on camera properly, is a bushing down there. There's a bushing down in that hole, and you can kind of see the circular part of it. I could not get that guy out. So that's going to stay in there because I can't get it out. Cleaned it up as much as I could. Over top of that, you've got a thrust washer, this guy here. And if you can see inside, it's beveled on this side and kind of straight on this side. And the beveled side points up. So the workshop manual tells you to essentially put that bush in and then put this thrust washer in. And you want to use a little tool to help you kind of get it in there, get it situated, because it wants to bounce around a little bit. So now that thrust washer is in there. See that? And then it says to put the rack inside. So I've got the rack all cleaned up, but I'm not greasing it yet because I'll be able to take it back out and grease it. So obviously all the gear teeth are here and it's all flat over here, and you got to have the gear teeth where the rack and the pinion go. So we want to slide it in. Doesn't matter which side you slide in from, but you got to get obviously the teeth down here because that's what you're doing. And then you rotate it so that the teeth, if you can look like that, kind of stick up because the pinion's going to go straight down. So there's the pinion, and that's going to go in like this. So it's obviously got to engage the teeth. So we'll go ahead and put the pinion in. You might have to play with it a little bit so that it gets fully seated here. There we go. Kind of click down in there. Again, I'm not using any grease. I'll come back through and grease it. And now on top of the pinion, you've got a bushing, big old fat bushing here. You've got another thrust washer. And these are bigger diameter, you really can't confuse them with the other ones. There is no bevel in this thrust washer, so I'm assuming it doesn't matter which way it goes in. And then you've got this guy, a little retaining ring here, and inside there, inside of a groove, is an O-ring. So you want to renew this O-ring. I'm sure you can pick them up at your True Value or whatever like that, just in their bag of O-rings. So if you need to renew that, you want to go ahead and do that. So we will go ahead and put the thrust washer in first, and that just is going to drop over top. Then the bush, and then that retaining ring. And you notice a little hole here. There's that little dowel pin that I think I was talking about, that you don't want to lose that earlier in the video. And that's, you obviously need to go line that up because that dowel pin's going to go in there. So go ahead and get that in there. And then you've got a circlip, this guy, and we're going to go ahead. This isn't really, oh, there it goes. We'll go ahead and get a pair of circlip pliers real quick, and we're going to go ahead and put that circlip in there. So now that's assembled. A lot of play in that, right? You don't want that because it's going to move around. So next up here is we're going to mount a dial gauge on here, and we're going to measure that throw out. Got the dial gauge set up here, and all you're really doing is just, I have a magnetic base in the arm and all that, and obviously the pinion, just by gravity, is going to be fully inserted. So press down on it a little bit just to make sure, zero it out, and then you're going to lift, and I'm looking at 53 thousandths or so. Do it again, 0, up. Yep, 53 thousandths. So 53 thousandths is the total float on that pinion. And the workshop manual says is to make up a shin pack to give the minimum end float consistent with free rotation of the pinion shafts. So essentially, get it as tight as you can get it while you can still turn it. Unfortunately, it's not real easy to turn. So I have the original shims that I had when I took this thing all apart. I held on to them, obviously, and they're going back in. And I'm not going to really measure anything. I don't really understand why it has you measure the end float in the first place, because it doesn't really give you a spec, at least that I could find for the end float. Let me flip through the workshop manual and see if there is one. There is not at least that I could find. So again, I don't really understand why they're having you do that, but there you go. It has you measure it. So we'll take this off, get that circlip out. Just to give you an idea here, so let me measure the, I got a total shim pack of about 50 thousandths. So obviously the difference here is going to be about 3 thousandths when I get this back together. So we'll take the circlip out. The bushings, or all the shim packs, essentially go underneath. Let me make sure I'm going to get this right here. All the shims are going to go underneath the retaining ring, so you pull that out, we'll put those shims back in. Put the retaining ring back in. I'm not going to put the, what's it called in there yet? The little round thing. Go ahead and put the circlip in. Doesn't look like there's any play now. Doesn't feel like it anyway. I'll get this reset here. So we'll try to get this as zero as we can. So I'm at negative 1,000th, 1,000th or so, half thousandth. Lift it up, push it down, lift it up. I'm only getting about 1,000th of play. So with that, let's see. I can spin it with no problem. And there's no grease in it. I can still spin it good. And I have very little play. Now that I've actually moved it, let me redo that measurement and see if something wasn't fully seated possibly. Got it set back up, got the gauge on there, about 1,000 it's reading. I zeroed it out, lift it up. About 3,000, so it's giving me about 2 thousandths of play. And I can spin it. Let's see what it actually says. Shims are available. Assemble a shim pack and retaining ring to the pinion, reinsert the assembly. Minimum end float consistent with free rotation. So I don't have any more shims. It probably feels like I could go a little tighter, but I don't have any more shims. That is what came out of there. I don't know if the thing's ever been taken apart before. I don't think so. So I'm going to kind of trust it. So now that that's all set up and verified, I'm going to take it all back apart. Again, if you have to renew that O-ring, now's a good time to do it. We'll get all sorts of greasy nastiness stuff in there. I'm going to use the Lucas Red and Tacky stuff, and we'll get that reassembled. And then the next up is going to be the portion here where we're going to actually load down on the steering rack and provide some resistance. So right now, that feels and works pretty good. So as with most of my videos, it takes me, 3 months, it feels like, to be able to record them all. So I wanted to point out in here, I'd mentioned the O-ring, and the O-ring that I ended up picking up was a number 11 O-ring, just from the plumbing department of my local Ace Hardware. So that's done. The other thing I'll point out is the circlip. You want to make sure that the opening of the circlip does not go over where the opening of that little pin goes in, just so the thing doesn't come popping out, obviously. But otherwise, that's set. Now, what's up is to set this guy in here, and what that's going to do, and it's not real obvious in the workshop manual because it just tells you to remove the end play. So like many of us, I cheated and watched Lynn's video that he did on a steering rack reassembly. And essentially the end play is the wiggle, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, that the shaft or the rack has. So we're going to go ahead, we put this in, tighten it down, and then measure it, and I'll show it as I get there. So you've got this cavity here, and you got this guy here, and it's obviously got a big old divot cut out of it. So that's only going to be able to go in one way. So that fits in there and then runs on the rack. And we'll just make sure that the rack runs in and out with that guy. Get that all the way, get your finger in there and get it seated all the way. And then the big fat cap, and there's a bunch of shims. If you remember when I took it apart, a bunch of shims in there. And there's also a spring that helps maintain the tension. But for now, what we're going to do is the workshop manual says to insert this screw here and tighten it down until you remove the end play. And that's where I said it's not incredibly obvious what end play they're talking about. But watching Lynn's video, and it makes sense that you would want now that you're going to try to lock this thing down. We did it this way. Now you want to lock it down so it doesn't wiggle back and forth. So it's a pretty obvious, you can probably hear that, pretty obvious amount of play in there. So you just tighten this down until that end play stops. And I also want to make sure that I have relatively freedom of movement here. And then we're going to take a feeler gauge and we're going to measure the gap between the body of the housing here and the bottom of this screw. And then the shims that we have, got the handful of shims here, you shim that out, that package out until it's 4 thousandths plus the distance that you've got with the feeler gauge. So that gives you a little bit of play. So I am going to measure this just for purposes of the video and for making sure, but I've got the shim pack here that I had that came with it when I took it apart. So we'll get the feeler gauges here and do some end play adjustments and see what we get. So obviously a lot of play there. A little bit less. And it doesn't feel like any end play right there. And the rack still moves pretty freely. A couple hang-ups, but definitely no end play. All right, so that feels pretty good, and that thing's pretty tight. Go down, actually put a wrench on it here. 1 5/16 inches, by the way, so obviously you need a big wrench. Yeah, it's starting to feel pretty jerky. Still no play, so we're going to call that one good. And so now we'll measure the gap. It's pretty good size here. Let's see, 21 is fine. $23 is fine. Let's go to 25. 25 does not. 24. All right, so it looks like 24 thousandths is what I got. 25 fits, but with a little bit of oomph. 24 fits good. So 24 thousandths, and like I said, according to the workshop manual, you want that plus 4 thousandths, so that's going to be a total of 28 thousandths thickness here, which means I need 28 thousandths thickness in the shim pack. And let's see what we got. About 35.5, so quite a bit of difference there. So the concern now is if I've got 28 thousandths to make up and I've got 35 thousandths worth of shims, that's obviously going to be too thick. So let's see what I got here and see if I can make up shims. That'll equal 28 thousandths. So I got 3 shims here that are 29 thousandths. So yeah, so 3 of these shims out of the 4. The 4th one is only about 4 thousandths thick. So out of what we got here, we're going to go ahead and go with that. So now I'm going to take this pack back off, get it all lubricated in there, get the spring in there, and go ahead and tighten it down. There's no torque spec here, but I'm essentially just going to quote unquote tighten it, and that should do us. All right, so the spring, lubricate the inside of this cap here, and get the shims on there. Go ahead and give it a nice little tightness. All right, check it. All right, still rolls pretty well. Now, so that's kind of your initial check or your initial setup. So now what we've got to do is get a final setup, and you need counterweights and all sorts of fancy stuff for that. So let's see how we're going to set that up. So I've got the shims in there, I've got the cap tightened down, and essentially what the workshop manual says is you set up a pressure gauge or a tensioner, and essentially it should take 2 pounds to rotate this. So I've got a very contrived setup here. I've got an old water pump pulley that weighs just over 2 pounds on this metal rod, and I'm using a steering linkage, the coupler here, and essentially we're just going to put that on, and that should rotate freely. And it does. So that's probably can go a little bit tighter than it is, but I can't really turn it by hand that easily. I don't really have a good shim pack setup that if I want to move another shim, it's probably going to be too tight. I may or may not have tried that already. So I'm going to be comfortable with where I am at here and call it good. So when you're done, up at the top here, this is you get this greased periodically, and there's also a grounding strap, electrical little braided grounding strap that goes in there, but we're not going to put that in yet. So that little brass washer or brass nut and a star washer gets in there. We'll get that tightened down, and then periodically you pull that out, put a grease fitting in there, and then grease it up, and you're all set. So now we've got that good to go here, and essentially the steering rack itself is kind of set. Now we have to put the tie rod ends on. Next up, we'll put together the tie rod assembly. We've got a couple pieces here. We've got a cup nut. So the tie rod is going to go into the cup nut, and it's curved down to the bottom to kind of fit in there nice. Then you have this sleeve here, the cup sleeve. That's going to go on top. That fits in there. Then you need a locking plate. I got new ones, obviously, because they're going to get bent over. And then the sleeve nut. I think that's the sleeve nut. So that'll all get tightened down. And then I'm just going to hand tighten it. And then obviously you've got play in there between the tie rod and the nut. So there's shims that are going to go in there, and they're going to take up that play. And what the workshop manual is you shim it until you get about a 2/1000th of a ball rise. And again, not real clear in the workshop manual what ball rise means. But what I think is they mean the height as you push the tie rod up into the assembly here, how much difference that's going to be. So I've got shims that came with the car, obviously, and I would expect them to be pretty close, but we're going to go ahead, put this in the vise here. Like so. So that allows that play. And then a handy dandy measurement device here. Get that in there. Nice and tight. Turn it on. Looks like you can kind of read that. Zero it out. All right, so about as zero as I can get it here, reading about 1/1000th. Up about 32. Down about 1/1000th. Up 32. Down about 1/1000th. Now, you also want to make sure that the ball joint is hanging as straight down as you can. So all I'm really doing is kind of wiggling it around there to try to let it find its own spot, and then making sure my zero doesn't really move. So I'm getting consistently about 30/1000ths or so of a delta. So there's 30/1000ths of a total gap right now. I want to leave 2, so my shim pack's got to equal about 28/1000ths or so. So let's go over to the other workbench here and see what I'm looking at for my total shim packs. So here is the shim pack that I have. Zero up my micrometer. And we're looking at about 23/1000ths or so. So that's a little light from what I want. But we're going to go ahead and put it in. So now we've got the, did I really call that thing the right thing there? It was a sleeve nut, I did. So now we're going to go ahead and put the shims in. And again, this is what was in there. Go ahead and put the, not the spring yet. Go ahead and put the locking ring and the sleeve nut back on. Now that doesn't feel like any play whatsoever in there. So we'll go back over to the workbench and see if I really get any play, but it doesn't feel like anything at all. All right, so we're looking at about a -1,000th. Push it up. Yeah, I'm not getting really any play. Maybe 1,000th. But with 1,000th, I don't have shims in here that are any smaller than 1,000th, nor do they make them that small. So I think this is about as close as I'm going to get it. So I'll take that. And what the workshop manual further goes on to say is make sure that you don't have any binding or anything in here. And it's a little squeaky because there's no grease or anything. I'll pack it up with grease, but that feels pretty good. So I'm confident that this one is at least set up good enough. So we'll go over and finish the assembly. Final assembly all done. Rotates nice and smooth in there. Got it all greased up, full of grease. And the lock tabs I will bend over eventually. I'm not going to do them quite yet, just because I want to. I just want to wait. So we'll go ahead and do the other side, same exact thing, same exact measurements, same exact assembly, and we'll get that taken care of and then come back. So next up, that we've got the tie rods assembled. I've got them onto the steering rack a little bit, not really adjusted yet. The next check that you want to do, according to the workshop manual, is there is a spring and then this lock nut that go in here. So we put those in. There are convenient pictures in the workshop manual here. That little spring right there is what I'm talking about. And it just fits into a little cutout in the internal to the rack tube. So it's in there. So now what the workshop manual has to do is measure the distance between the lock nut here and the lock nut on the other side. And so that should be about 60.8 centimeters or so. Then I've got my handy dandy sewing measurement here, and all I'm doing is going from this lock nut here all the way to this other guy, and I've got about that 60.8 or so. Not exact, but pretty close. So now these lock nuts are set, and what I'll want to do is screw the tie rod assemblies into those lock nuts, and then we'll go ahead and essentially call it good from there. Now there's several other measurements in here. The workshop manual shows you a breakdown up at the top there of all of the different measurements. Spitfire had the same thing, all of the different measurements. And unfortunately, I forgot my tie rods ends. These are the old nasty ones. I forgot the new ones at home, so I don't have the ability to measure that. But it should all come together. That distance between those two is essentially the key part, and that's what that says. And then you will screw these down and then tighten the lock nut to maintain that. And then we're going to go ahead and fit the rubber bellows on, and that's an adventure in and of itself. And then we'll be practically done. So we'll go ahead, get this screwed down here. Hopefully I don't run out of thread. And it doesn't look like I am. Oh, it's going to be close. Screw this guy down here. All right, so that meets up. So I'm going to go grab my my wrench here. This one's got this tie rod end's about as tight as I can get it. So the lock nut's got to go that way. Let's see what my measurement looks like now. It's still pretty close to 60.8. Obviously, you got this stuff in the way. It doesn't make it real easy to make a straight line shot here, but I think it's good enough. So now what I'm going to do is I'll go over, I'll grab another wrench here, I'll lock this guy down and tighten those lock nuts in, take a final measurement, and we should be all set. 1 5/16 inches for all this stuff here, so you need some halfway decent size tools. All right, so that guy should be nice and tight. The tie rod still moves adequately. You want to make sure of that. Come to the other side here. All right, again, make sure the tie rod moves nice and free there. Let's go ahead and do one more check of the distance. And yeah, that's close enough for me. All right, so that's that for putting together. This guy is pretty much done with the exception, like I said, of the rubber boots. Check one last check here. What did I do? put that on here again, make sure I still got good movement. And it feels good. So that's brilliant. So the rubber boots, obviously you want to probably get new ones of these. My guess is you probably are destroyed. I picked these up from the Roaster Factory. They have like a little kit that comes with the boots themselves, some pipe clamps, and they use the regular, quote unquote, regular pipe clamps, which I'm not really a big fan of, just a look wise. I try to find the original one, so I've got a couple that I had laying around, and then they do give you an original one for the larger size. Now we're going to do the easy side first. You notice this one is a big opening, and then this guy is a smaller opening. This is a pain in the rear, this guy, because you have to get this smaller opening over top of the big old lock nuts and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't make it very easy on you, but there's going to be a lot of grease involved here and probably cursing and gnashing of teeth. And there's got to be some way that I can figure out to taper this to get that one opening to get that this boot open a little bit better. Now you can soak them in hot water and all that kind of stuff to try to make them a little bit more pliable. I didn't really find when I did this on the Spitfire that was really all that advantageous. I mean, it helped a little bit, but not nearly enough. So we're going to go ahead and do the larger one first because, it's, like I said, it's easier. So you want to lubricate all this stuff over here. So we're going to get grease over here, and then we'll get going on there, and I'll show you. Got all the stuff lubricated here. Got the inside of the small end here lubricated and the large end. Go ahead and slide this guy on. And then sometimes, obviously, the steering rack wants to steer, especially going over the threads. So once you get that thin part over the threads, it's not too bad. And we'll go ahead and just kind of fit this over top here. And I'm going to use my orange sticks and everything just to kind of open this up and sneak this over top here. And then instead of a pipe clamp, what it uses is this piece of wire here, which I'm not quite sure how that sets up yet. So we're going to, we'll look into that, but I want to get it fit over top here, obviously. We'll take care of that first. This one is tricky, but not as bad as the other one. All right, well, you guys don't really need to watch me fumble around with this thing. So essentially, get that spread open as much as you can and get it on, fit over at the top here. As I sometimes do, I got ahead of myself here, so I apologize for that. Essentially, I was able to work the boot over top here, and just, you need a vise, you need 3 hands essentially. So you just kind of get something that's not going to poke a hole through or anything like that, and you just work it around and eventually get it right. I got a small clamp here, and essentially that clamp is just positioned so that when the rack goes all the way out, this isn't stretched so far that I'm worried about it. It's still pretty loose there, and when you go in with it, obviously everything is going to compress, and that's not really sliding. Now, I do have a bunch of grease here, so if it were to slide, that's okay. And then instead of using the wire that came with the kit, I actually broke it. I got new lock wire and just lock wired around here, and that's what the factory uses, those lock wire. I don't really know how that other one worked, but it was a little too thick, and then I twisted it a little too much and it broke, so I got it like that. But that's good. There is a little lip right there if you had noticed when I was putting it together. So as long as you get it cinched in there, it should be all right. Now the fun part. One thing that I did not point out because I didn't do it was you need to get your pipe clamp or whatever else you're using on here first. And depending on how big this is, you're not going to be able to fit it over all the bolts for the tie rod ends. So I took mine back off. Depending on the clip you're using, you might be able to just open it up and close it again. One thing about these old-fashioned wire clips is they do not lend themselves well to doing that, unlike the Bandit clips where you could probably get away with it. So I ended up taking this apart. Glad I ordered more locking tabs, redid the locking tabs, put it back on. So now, though, I've got to get the rubber boot over top of this. I showed you a picture of it, how much smaller it is. Now, one other thing that I did is I've had it sitting in front of my jet heater, so it is warming up. I think I mentioned not to use boiling water. I mean, you can, but the jet heater, we'll see if that's going to help me at all and try to get this over top here. Again, I'm going to use the orange sticks here and see if I can't get lucky. All right, so as before, that's going to slip on there, and I can already kind of tell that I'm not going to get lucky here. But we'll give it a shot. Now, a couple things you need to watch here. One is you don't want to tear the rubber boot collar, obviously, as you are fitting it over top, which with these clips here, or the locking tabs, you got to be careful of it. And obviously, everything gets really greasy, and pretty quickly here, you lose any purchase that you had on this piece of rubber, and it wants to fall back in on itself. I don't know how well you're able to see me fumbling around here, but essentially that's what you're trying to do, is fit this small hole over this large piece and then come back and get it onto the shaft here and then tighten it down. So again, I don't have any tricks for this. I'm just going to kind of work on it. I know LN used like plastic slats to kind of fade it on, and then got it started, and then snuck him out of there while he still could. And I'm going to probably try some semblance of that, kind of two little tongues or spoons or something, kind of put them on like this and wrap them around. And as you tighten them down, you would hope that you open that hole up. So, but I'm going to need more, either more than 2 of these or wider than these. So let's see if I got anything laying around that I can do. I don't want to use metal again because I don't want to tear anything. Can't use cardboard or anything that's going to fall apart with the grease. So who knows? But I'm just going to keep working on it, and whenever I come up with a final solution, I'll let you know. But there's all sorts of different things, and you're probably better off trying to figure out yourself than watch me get it wrong. I had a little bit of an epiphany moment here, so I will show you this. So obviously you got the boot here. This hole here has got to go over top of these nuts. It's too small. And instead of trying to fair it in or somehow try to start a small hole and expand it over, just literally just jam it on there. So go ahead and get this thing started. Get the tie rod coming through. And then just, as you get that, just pull the thing over. And then it will eventually pop through. You can only compress this thing so far. That's going to come through the hole. And then just work it on. This is the easy part over here. And then we're going to go ahead and clamp this guy here. And then we'll go ahead and clamp that guy over here. Same rules as on the other side. So obviously that took seconds, a lot easier, and somebody had to figure this out. I'm not that smart, but who knows? All right, everybody, that's all I got. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think. Well, a little bit of pain in the rear, but it's these kind of little things that you want to inspect. Obviously, with brakes and steering and critical components like that, you want to make sure that stuff is put back together properly and in accordance with the workshop manual. I can't believe somebody didn't try this with the rubber boot here, and I'm definitely not the first, but I haven't seen it, so who knows? Anyway, that's all I got. Thanks again for watching. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.